Welcome back to the deep dive. Uh, we have a topic today that I think is really going to resonate with a very specific and honestly very uncomfortable feeling that a lot of you listening probably carry around.
Oh, yeah. It is a feeling that usually hits you right around, say, Sunday night.
Right, exactly. Or, right before a big Monday morning meeting where everyone is looking at you.
The Sunday scaries,
Yeah.
but a very specific flavor of them.
Yes, the imposter syndrome flavor. It is that creeping, sinking suspicion that despite your title, despite the whole team looking at you for answers, and despite the salary hitting your bank account every 2 weeks, you actually have no idea what you are doing.
You're basically just sitting there waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, all right, the gig is up.
Yeah.
We know you are improvising.
I mean, it really is the universal secret of the professional world. We all walk around assuming everyone else got the instruction manual at orientation,
Yeah.
and we were the only ones who missed that session.
Which is why we are doing this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are looking at The Manager's Handbook by David Dodson. And the reason we picked this specific book out of the literally thousands of business books out there is because Dodson starts his whole narrative right there in that exact moment of panic.
It is such a great starting point because his background makes it so relatable, but also really surprising. I mean, on paper, David Dodson is the absolute prototype of the perfect business leader.
Oh, completely. If you were going to build a CEO in a lab, you would basically just print out his resume. He has an economics degree. He spent time at McKinsey and Company.
Which is essentially finishing school for the corporate elite.
Right. And he earned an MBA from Stanford.
Yeah.
So you look at that and think, okay, this guy knows everything. He is the definitive expert.
But then the rubber actually meets the road. He starts his first company. He is finally the one sitting in the big chair in charge of everything. And he realizes something absolutely terrifying.
He doesn't know how to do the actual job.
Exactly. He knows strategy in the abstract sense. He can read a balance sheet, but he doesn't know how to, say, hire a receptionist.
Or how to run a weekly meeting without putting the entire room to sleep.
He definitely does not know how to fire someone who is really nice, but just totally incompetent.
It is the brutal realization that credentials are not skills. There is this massive canyon between vision, which is the stuff business schools love to teach with all their case studies, and execution. And execution is the stuff that actually keeps the lights on.
That distinction right there is the entire engine of our deep dive today. Dodson's core insight, and really the mission of the whole book, is to completely debunk the idea that management is some innate talent you were just born with.
We really have to dismantle that great man theory of leadership, or the great person theory. Dodson calls it the attribute theory.
Which is what, exactly, for those of you who might not be familiar with the term?
Well, we have this heavily romanticized idea in our culture that a great manager has a specific look or a specific personality.
Yeah.
They are incredibly charismatic. They are extremely extroverted.
Right, they command the room with a booming voice. They are General Patton or they are Steve Jobs.
Exactly. And I think we all naturally have that bias. If someone is quiet or unassuming, we do not immediately look at them and think, oh, there goes a CEO.
But Dodson is a data guy. He actually looked into this. And he notes that if you go to Google right now and search for entrepreneur characteristics, you get something like 350 million results.
And if you actually click through those results, they are almost entirely just platitudes. You see words like passionate, resourceful, dedicated, grit.
Which is helpful to absolutely no one. I mean, nobody is out there writing a job description saying they're looking for a lazy, unmotivated, indifferent leader.
Right. Those are just baseline positive human traits. They are not management skills. It is pure survivorship bias.
But when Dodson actually looked at the people who get things done at the highest possible level, the data tells a completely different story.
It really does. He looked at everyone from Bill Gates to Oprah Winfrey to military generals. And their personalities were wildly different. Some of them were extreme introverts who absolutely hated public speaking.
Some were massive extroverts.
Some were incredibly calm and stoic, while others were volatile or even arguably bipolar. The variable for their success was not their personality at all.
It was a set of 5 specific, highly transferable skills. So it is less like being a wizard with magical powers and more like, I don't know, being a plumber or a pianist.
He uses the piano metaphor in the book, and I think it is absolutely perfect. Think about it.
Yeah.
You do not just sit down at a Steinway and play a beautiful symphony just because you have a musical soul.
No, that is a recipe for terrible noise.
Exactly. You have to learn the boring mechanical sub-skills first. You have to learn how to read sheet music. You learn precise finger placement. You learn your scales.
You practice chords over and over until your hands physically cramp. And only once you master those boring mechanical sub-skills does the symphony actually happen.
Management is exactly the same thing. It is not magic. It is just a bundle of sub-skills. Dodson argues that if you can master 5 specific areas, you can manage quite literally anything.
And those 5 areas are team building, time management, seeking advice, priorities, and quality.
So for you listening today, we are going to do something a bit different. We're not going to talk about inspiring the troops or finding your core why.
We are going to break down the scales. We are going to look at the actual mechanics of how to run a team step by step. And we are starting with the first skill, which Dodson argues is the foundation for absolutely everything else, the commitment to building a team.
And specifically, we have to talk about the absolute nightmare that is hiring.
Oh, man. Hiring is the worst. I mean, it is obviously stressful for the candidate coming in, but I think people really underestimate how stressful it is for the manager sitting across the table.
Because you are terrified of making a mistake. And you should be. The statistics are absolutely brutal. One study Dodson cites shows that 46% of new hires fail within 18 months.
That is basically a coin flip. Just imagine if a surgeon had a 46% failure rate, you would never get on the operating table.
And yet we keep hiring the exact same way we always have. We sit across from someone in a nice conference room, we have a pleasant chat for 30 minutes, we think, hey, I could totally have a beer with this person, and then we offer them a job.
We prioritize our intuition over actual historical outcomes. And Dodson has this really terrifying historical example of why intuition fails so badly. It is taken from Malcolm Gladwell's work, Talking to Strangers.
Yes, it involves Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler. And this story just stops me in my tracks every single time I hear it. It is the ultimate cautionary tale against trusting your gut.
Let's set the scene for the listener. It is the late 1930s. Hitler is rapidly rising in power in Germany. The entire world is getting extremely nervous.
Right. And Neville Chamberlain, who is the British Prime Minister at the time, decides he needs to personally take the measure of the man. He genuinely believes in the power of the face-to-face meeting.
So he flies to Germany. He sits down with Hitler. They talk. Chamberlain is looking him right in the eye, watching his body language, listening to his tone of voice.
He is basically conducting the ultimate job interview.
He is. And he is relying entirely on that in-person intuition. He flies back to England. He waves that famous piece of paper in the air, and he tells the world that Hitler is a man who can be trusted.
Because he felt it in his gut. He was charmed, or at least he was convinced, by the physical presence of the man in the room.
Meanwhile, you have Winston Churchill.
Right. And Churchill never meets Hitler. He does not look him in the eye. He never shakes his hand. Instead, Churchill sits in his study and he just looks at the data.
He reads Hitler's ratings. He reads Mein Kampf. He tracks his actual policy decisions. He looks at the raw numbers regarding the military buildup.
Churchill looks at the actual outcomes of Hitler's behavior over the last decade. And he concludes, entirely correctly, that Hitler is a monster and a liar.
That is such a heavy, dark example, but the business lesson there is just crystal clear. Chamberlain was completely seduced by presence. Churchill was informed by data. That glint in the eye means absolutely nothing. The track record means everything.
Exactly. So bringing this back down to earth to hiring an accountant or a sales rep, if we cannot trust our gut in an interview, what do we replace it with? Dodson says you have to stop writing job descriptions and start writing hiring scorecards.
How are those two things different? Because I feel like most managers just copy and paste a generic job description from LinkedIn and call it a day.
And that right there is the problem. A typical job description is just a list of inputs and basic requirements. Must have 5 years of experience, must know Excel, must have a degree from a respectable university.
Right. It is a checklist of past attributes.
But a scorecard is totally different. It is a strict list of outcomes. It forces you to ask, what does this person need to actually accomplish in the next 12 months for us to be absolutely thrilled that we hired them?
There's a great story in the book about a trucking company that illustrates this shift perfectly. It really drives home the whole outcome versus attribute debate.
The bad speller story. This is fantastic. So a trucking company is trying to hire a new operations manager. The hiring team gets a resume, and they immediately want to toss it straight into the trash.
Why?
Because the guy has a typo on his resume. He actually spelled the word referral wrong.
Which, to be fair to that hiring team, is usually a massive red flag. We're all heavily conditioned to think that a typo equals carelessness.
Yes, but that is the attribute bias kicking in again. We automatically assume a bad speller implies a bad worker. But Dodson happened to be there, and he stopped them. He pulled out the scorecard they had created for the role.
And what did the scorecard say?
The outcomes required for the job were very specific. Number one, manage a massive fleet of rough-and-tumble blue-collar drivers. Number two, improve profit margins on the daily routes. So Dodson looked at the team and asked, does spelling referral correctly help him manage truck drivers?
Probably not. In fact, if he is too polished or corporate, he might actually get eaten alive by those drivers.
Exactly. The answer was clearly no. Spelling was not on the scorecard. So, despite the typo, they brought him in and interviewed him. And it turned out, this guy was an absolute logistics genius.
He knew the routes, he knew truck maintenance, he knew exactly how to talk to the drivers to get them on board.
They hired him, and within a year, he improved their profit margins by 7 full percentage points. If they had stuck to their gut reaction about the typo, if they had hired based purely on the attribute of good spelling, they would have lost millions of dollars in potential profit.
That perfectly captures the difference between hiring for experience and hiring for outcomes. There is another example he mentions about Paul English, the founder of Kayak, that pushes this even further.
Yes, this one is even more extreme. When Paul English was building Kayak, he specifically and intentionally avoided hiring anyone who had travel industry experience.
Which sounds completely insane if you are building a travel company. You would naturally think you want all the experts.
It does sound crazy until you look at his desired outcome. His core outcome on the scorecard was disruption. He desperately wanted to change how travel was booked on the internet.
So he knew that if he hired people with 20 years of experience at Expedia or American Airlines, they would just do what the industry had always done.
Exactly. They would come in heavily weighed down by industry baggage. To get the specific outcome of innovation, he had to actively ignore the experience line on the resume.
Okay, so let us say we have done the prep work, we have our scorecard, we know the exact outcomes we want. Now we are actually in the room with the candidate. How do we stop ourselves from falling back into the usual chit-chat trap? You know, the classic, so tell me a little about yourself.
You have to fundamentally change your entire questioning style. Most managers default to asking hypothetical questions. How would you handle a difficult client? Or, the worst one, what is your greatest weakness?
And literally everyone has a rehearsed, perfectly polished answer for those. Oh, my greatest weakness is that I just care too much and work too hard.
Right. When you ask hypothetical questions, you are only testing their ability to audition. You are not testing their actual ability to do the work. You're basically testing their improv comedy skills.
So what is the alternative?
Dodson says you need to switch entirely to behavioral questions. Do not ask what they would do in the future. Ask what they actually did in the past.
Can you give an example of how that sounds?
Sure. Instead of a hypothetical, you say, tell me about a specific time you had a furious client on the phone. What exactly did they say to you? What exactly did you say back to them? And what was the actual financial result?
You want the historical data. You want to be like Churchill looking at the actual record rather than Chamberlain looking at the performance in the room.
Precisely. And then comes the reference check, which, let us be honest here, most people treat as a total formality. You call the number, you ask, hey, is Bob a good guy? You say, yeah, Bob is great. And you hang up.
It really is a wasted opportunity the way most organizations do it. Dodson suggests two major shifts here. First, the concept of the tormentor versus mentor list.
Yes. Do not just talk to the people who loved the candidate. Try to actively find the people they clashed with. But even more importantly, you need to conduct the reference check directly against your scorecard.
How does that change the conversation with the reference?
Instead of asking if Bob is a hard worker, which is totally subjective, you get specific. You say, my scorecard requires Bob to increase sales by 20% in a down market. Has he ever done something exactly like that before in your organization? You are verifying their ability to deliver the specific outcome you need. You are literally fact-checking their history.
Okay, so we have successfully navigated the hiring minefield. We hired the person based on solid outcomes. They start on Monday morning. Dodson says this is where the sink or swim mentality usually kicks in. We show them their desk, we hand them a shiny new laptop, and we just say, good luck out there.
And that is exactly why so many new hires fail. Dodson introduces this vital concept called the 100-day window. He argues that the hiring process absolutely does not end when they sign the employment contract. It ends after their first 100 days. You need a formal vigilance process.
I really love the word vigilance here. It implies that you are actively watching for something specific. It sounds almost slightly paranoid.
He actually wants you to be a little paranoid because we all suffer terribly from confirmation bias. Once we hire someone, Our ego desperately wants to prove that we were right.
So if the new hire misses a deadline in week 2 or they upset a major client in week 3, we immediately make excuses for them. We say, oh, they're just settling in, or the onboarding process was a bit rough.
Dodson says you have to stop doing that. You need to schedule a formal mandatory meeting at day 30 and day 100 with the original hiring team, and you have to ask one brutal question.
If we could do it all over again, knowing what we know now, would we still hire them?
Yes. And if the honest answer is no, you have to act immediately. The cost of keeping a mishire around for a year, the salary, the toxic morale, the massive lost opportunity cost, it is astronomical compared to just fixing the mistake in the first 100 days. It feels harsh in the moment, but it's actually highly responsible management.
This leads perfectly into how we handle employee performance in general. Dodson goes to absolute war against the annual review. And I have to say, I am completely with him on this. Does anyone anywhere actually like the annual review?
Nobody. Managers hate writing them because it is a massive administrative paperwork burden. Employees hate receiving them because it feels like Judgment Day. Dodson discusses the old rank and yank systems that were used by companies like GE and Microsoft, where they would literally rank everyone and fire the bottom 10% every year.
It totally destroyed morale because it essentially pitted teammates against each other in a zero-sum game.
But the even bigger problem with the annual review is just the timing. It is completely disconnected from the actual work.
Right. He tells a story about Paul English again, this time from back when he was working at Intuit. He had a big presentation with Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, and apparently Paul really messed up a huge part of the meeting.
He did. He rambled on. He completely lost the room. It was a bad performance. Now, most normal bosses would just make a mental note of that failure, file it away in a drawer, and bring it up 6 months later in December during the formal annual review.
They would sit him down and say, hey, Paul, remember that meeting way back in June where you totally embarrassed us in front of Larry Ellison?
And Paul would have just stared at him blankly, because who actually remembers the specific details of a meeting from 6 months ago? The crucial learning moment is entirely gone. But Paul's boss did not wait. He physically stopped Paul in the parking lot immediately after they walked out of the meeting.
He said, Paul, I need to give you some feedback right now.
Exactly. He broke down what happened right there in the parking lot while the cement was still wet. That is what Dodson calls instant performance feedback, or IPF.
Because if he had waited 6 months, the lesson would be completely lost. But how do you actually do that without just sounding like you are complaining or yelling? You cannot just say, hey, you talked way too much in there.
Dodson provides a very specific 6-part framework for this. Exactly. So you do not just sound like you are venting your frustrations. It flows logically like this: expectation, measurement, feedback, obstacles, support, and finally, alignment.
Let's actually unpack that framework, because the word feedback can very often just sound like a polite way of saying, you screwed up.
Right. So using that parking lot example, the conversation might sound something like this. First, you state the expectation. Paul, the expectation is that we are highly concise when presenting to Larry.
Second, the measurement. You spoke for 10 uninterrupted minutes on a relatively minor point.
Third is the actual feedback. Doing that made us look unprepared, and we visibly lost his attention.
Fourth, you ask about obstacles. Was there some obstacle preventing you from keeping it brief?
Fifth is support. How can I better support you in our next meeting to make sure this doesn't happen?
And sixth, alignment. Let's agree on a subtle physical signal I can give you across the table if you start going long next time.
That is just so much more productive than simply saying, hey, shut up next time. It is a genuine coaching conversation, not a scolding.
It also really closely touches on Kim Scott's concept of radical candor, caring personally about the employee while challenging them directly on their work. If you do not care, it is just obnoxious aggression. If you do not challenge them, it is what she calls ruinous empathy.
Speaking of challenging feedback, let us talk about the 360 review. This is the system where you get feedback from your boss, your peers, and the people who actually report to you. It sounds amazing in theory. You get the full, multi-dimensional picture of your performance. But Dodson shares a pretty intense horror story about a manager named Tony.
The Tony story is the ultimate classic example of how not to do a 360 review. Tony's company collected all this anonymous feedback, and they just handed him the raw, unfiltered comments on a piece of paper. People wrote things like, Tony is extremely difficult, or I absolutely hate working with him.
Or just, he is annoying.
That is not constructive feedback. That is basically just the toxicity of a YouTube comment section printed out.
Exactly. It completely crushed him. It was incredibly demoralizing and practically useless for actual improvement. To make a 360 review actually work, Dodson says you need to implement the 3 C's: curate, create, and close the loop.
Walk us through those.
First, you curate. A seasoned manager or an HR professional needs to read all the raw feedback and actively filter out the emotional toxicity. You turn a comment like "Tony is a jerk" into a manageable theme, like "Tony needs to actively work on his patience during stressful team meetings." You find the underlying themes.
Second, you create a growth plan. You do not just dump a list of problems on their desk. You build a concrete roadmap for actually fixing those behaviors.
And third, you close the loop. And this is honestly the most important part of the entire process.
Why is closing the loop so critical?
Because usually people in an organization give feedback and then they hear absolute silence. Nothing visibly changes. The person receiving the feedback needs to stand up in front of their entire team and say, "I heard your feedback. Here's exactly what I learned about myself, and here's exactly what I am going to change moving forward."
That requires an immense amount of personal vulnerability, but if you actually do it, it builds massive, unshakable trust. It shows the team that their voice actually mattered and had an impact.
Okay, so we have hired, we have coached, we have reviewed, but sometimes, despite all of that effort, it just does not work out. We have to talk about the hardest topic: firing, or as Dodson puts it, coaching underperformance.
It truly is the hardest part of the job. It is the thing that keeps managers awake at night staring at the ceiling. But Dodson gives us a very clear, almost clinical diagnostic tool for this: the 4-question test.
Question 1. If you ranked your entire team into A, B, and C players, where does this person fall? Question 2. If you look 3 years into the future, do they realistically fit into the organizational chart? Question 3. Would you rehire them today if you had to pay them 125% of their current salary?
But the real kicker is the second part of the test, the litmus test. This is the single question that usually gives you the absolute truth immediately.
Yes. If this person walked into your office today, sat down, and unexpectedly resigned, would you be secretly relieved or would you be genuinely devastated?
If the answer is relieved, you already have your answer. You need to stop kidding yourself. You're just dragging out the inevitable at this point. And usually managers are keeping them around simply because the manager wants to avoid the awkward, painful conversation, not because it is actually good for the company.
You are prioritizing your own emotional comfort over the team's overall success, which is a failure of management.
He also brings up the no asshole rule, referencing the famous book by Robert Sutton. What do you do if you have a massive high performer, someone who crushes all their numbers, but they are incredibly toxic to the rest of the team?
They absolutely have to go. Dodson is aggressively clear on this point. A toxic high performer quietly destroys the performance of everyone else around them. If your top sales guy brings in $1 million in revenue but causes 3 of your best support staff to quit in frustration, his net value to the company is actually negative.
You can coach a lack of skills, you can coach a lack of knowledge, but you generally cannot coach a grown adult out of being a jerk. Character is mostly fixed. Skills are what you learn.
And when you finally do make the difficult decision to let them go, Dodson has a very clear mantra: directness is kindness.
That means no feedback sandwiches when firing someone.
No feedback sandwiches. No vague language like, "We are making some strategic realignments and sadly your role is impacted." No. You look them in the eye and say, "I've decided that this is no longer a good fit, and today is your last day." It is painfully clear, but it allows the person to process the actual reality of the situation immediately, rather than wondering what just happened. Preparation is true compassion in this scenario.
All right, let us significantly shift gears here. We have built the team, we have coached them. Now, how do we actually get the work done? Part 2 of the book is called Fanatical Custodian of Time, and I absolutely love that he starts this section by talking about the ancient Babylonians to explain why our modern corporate calendars are such a complete mess.
It is such a wonderfully weird historical quirk. Have you ever actually wondered why almost all of our meetings are scheduled for exactly 60 minutes? Why not 47 minutes? Why not 12?
It is definitely not, because most topics naturally take exactly 1 hour to discuss.
Exactly. It is because 4,000 years ago, the Babylonians counted using a base 12 mathematical system. They literally counted the knuckles on their fingers. That ancient math eventually gave us the 60-minute hour. So today, In the modern age of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, we blindly schedule 60-minute meetings, not because that is the time the work requires, but literally because of ancient knuckle counting.
It is just completely arbitrary.
It is totally inefficient. Dodson's fanatical rule here is simple. Activity is not progress. Just being busy is not the same thing as being genuinely effective. He quotes Henry David Thoreau, who said, "It is not enough to be busy. So are the ants. What are busy about?"
So his solution is to forcefully compress meetings. If you have a standard 30-minute slot on the calendar, make it 20. If you have a 60-minute slot, squeeze it down to 40. You actually create a greater quantity of time in your day simply by shaving off the customary fat.
And what do we inevitably do with all that newly created extra time? We usually just ruin it by filling it with email.
Which is the ultimate modern trap. So he introduces the Ohio rule to combat this. Only handle it once.
We are all so unbelievably guilty of this. You open an email, you quickly scan it, you think to yourself, oh, I will deal with this complicated issue later, and then you close it. Then 2 hours later, you open it again. You scan it again. You close it again. You end up touching the exact same minor task 5 different times.
It is the equivalent of picking up a piece of trash off the floor, looking at it, and then putting it right back on the floor.
The Ohio rule dictates that if you open the email, you must make a decision right then and there. You either reply immediately, you delete it, or you formally schedule a specific time on your calendar to handle it. You absolutely cannot just put it back in the pile.
But doing that requires some serious discipline. It also requires the ability to comfortably say no to people.
Which is an absolute superpower for a manager. He gives the very relatable example of someone reaching out and asking for a 60-minute lunch so they can quote-unquote pick your brain. Agreeing to that basically destroys your entire afternoon focus. Instead, Dodson says offer them a highly focused 20-minute coffee or even just a 10-minute phone call. You can still be helpful and polite without completely surrendering control of your calendar.
This philosophy feeds directly into the concept of deep work, which he pulls from Cal Newport's research. The fundamental idea that not all work hours are created legally equal.
Right. There is shallow work. That is your emails, your Slack messages, your basic admin tasks. And then there is deep work. That is long-term strategy, complex coding, deep analytical writing. The major problem is that shallow work is profoundly easier. It gives our brains these constant little dopamine hits. We think, oh, look, I cleared my inbox. I accomplished something today.
But deep work is where the actual needle-moving value is created for the company.
Dodson argues that managers need to rigorously and defensively schedule deep work blocks on their calendars. Usually this is best in the mornings when your cognitive energy is at its absolute peak. You block it off. You decline all meetings. You close your email client entirely.
He mentions a fascinating experiment with a software company that literally banned all internal interruptions on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. No meetings, no tap on the shoulder questions.
And their measured productivity jumped massively from 47% to 65% just by forcing everyone to shut up and work. Silence is incredibly profitable. If you let your entire day be dictated by the ping of the next notification, you are simply letting other people dictate your daily priorities.
To make that kind of focus happen, you obviously need a plan. Dodson talks about the necessity of a planning ritual. The mantra is, make your day to make your month.
This goes right back to the classic Eisenhower matrix. Urgent versus important. Most managers, unfortunately, live their entire lives trapped in the urgent but not important quadrant. They're constantly chasing shiny objects and putting out loud, immediate fires that do not actually matter in the long run.
To successfully fight that, you need a daily ritual. Every single morning, before you do anything else, you sit down. You write out your tactical statement. What are the big, meaningful goals for today? You number your specific tasks in order of true priority, and then you eat the frog.
Eat the frog. That is the famous Mark Twain quote, right?
Yes. Twain said, if it is your job to eat a live frog, it is best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it is your job to eat 2 frogs, it is best to eat the biggest one first. It basically means do the hardest, most important, most dreaded task immediately, before you even open your email, before the daily crises start hitting your desk.
Because if you wait until 4 in the afternoon to write that massive strategy document, it is just not going to happen. You will be entirely too mentally depleted.
Let's circle back to meetings for a second, because they really are the biggest time thief in any organization. He cites the incredibly unique method used by Jeff Bezos at Amazon and by the leadership at Netflix.
Ah, the silent meeting. This is truly revolutionary if you can actually pull it off in your company culture. Jeff Bezos famously banned PowerPoint presentations entirely at Amazon. Instead, if you want to call a meeting, You have to write a detailed, fully fleshed out 6-page narrative memo. When the meeting starts, everyone sits down in the room in dead silence for the first 20 minutes and just reads the memo.
And then only after everyone has read it do you discuss it. It sounds incredibly awkward, just sitting there in a conference room with six other people in total silence.
It definitely feels weird the first few times you do it. But think about the traditional alternative. Usually someone stands up and presents a PowerPoint. They literally just read the bullet points off the screen, and everyone else in the room is bored out of their minds or checking their phones under the table.
Right. It is incredibly passive.
The silent meeting achieves two massive things. One, it ruthlessly forces the presenter to actually think through their logic beforehand. You cannot hide a weak, lazy argument behind a flashy slide transition. Two, everyone starts the verbal discussion on the exact same page. Nobody is asking, hey, can you go back to slide 4? I missed that. The efficiency gain is just staggering.
He also talks about the role of the moderator in these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, he strongly argues that the boss should almost never be the moderator.
Exactly. If the boss moderates the meeting, they inherently control the flow of the conversation. And because of human nature, people will unconsciously try to please the boss. Dodson references John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy explicitly knew that if he was physically sitting in the room, his top generals would just tell him whatever they thought he wanted to hear.
So Kennedy would purposely leave the room, or he would explicitly appoint a completely neutral moderator to ensure that actual heated debate took place. You need a moderator whose only job is to unearth the truth, not to preserve the existing hierarchy.
And finally, on the topic of time management, we have to discuss delegation. This is the painful psychological shift from being a doer to actually managing managers.
It really is the hardest mental shift for new leaders. He tells the story of Gayatri Datar from a nonprofit called Earthenable. They were building custom earthen floors in rural homes in Rwanda. And initially, she was physically down in the mud, mixing materials, doing absolutely everything herself. She was the ultimate bottleneck for the entire organization's growth.
She had to come to the harsh realization that her actual job was not to build floors. Her job was to build a company that builds floors. Dodson gives us a brilliant mathematical formula for delegation here called the 6-month rule.
I really love this specific math because it completely defeats the universal excuse of, well, it is just faster if I do it myself.
It is incredibly simple. If a recurring task takes you 1 hour to do, and you do it once a week, that is roughly 25 hours of your time over the next 6 months. Now, if it takes you 5 solid hours to train someone else to do it properly, your immediate instinct says, I do not have 5 free hours today. I will just do it myself in 1 hour.
But the long-term math says you must spend the 5 hours today in order to save 20 hours over the next 6 months. You have to force your brain to think in a 6-month time frame, not the panicked time frame of today.
And when you finally do delegate that task, you should use the SCS framework. Specific, co-create, and support. You must be highly specific about the desired outcome. You need to co-create the execution plan with them, rather than just dictating it like a tyrant. And you must support them by giving them the actual resources they need. You cannot just dump a massive project on their desk and run away.
Okay, moving on to part 3 of the book, the willingness to seek and take advice. This sounds like very obvious advice on the surface, but Dodson frames it as breaking through the ego barrier.
It is what he calls the Superman complex. So many managers genuinely fear that actively asking for help makes them look weak or incompetent to their team. But the hard data shows the exact opposite reality. The most wildly successful people like Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, the truly great CEOs, they are relentless advice sponges. They are constantly, aggressively asking questions because they possess the ultimate confidence to know that they do not know everything.
Dodson actually provides a concrete script for this. He calls it the 5 questions. It is a structured way to ask your employees, your customers, and your vendors for real feedback. My absolute favorite question on his list is, what is the one single thing we should stop doing immediately?
That is an absolute goldmine of a question. Every company slowly accumulates useless habits over time, like barnacles on the bottom of a ship. You ask, why do we generate this massive 40-page report every Tuesday? And the answer is always, well, I don't know, Bob used to really like it and Bob left the company 5 years ago. Asking what should we stop doing instantly clears out those barnacles. It frees up tremendous amounts of wasted resources.
He also makes a very sharp distinction between having a friend and having a mentor. He actually provides a scorecard for evaluating potential mentors, too.
He does. A true mentor is not just a friendly cheerleader who tells you you are doing great. When you are looking for a mentor, you need to look for 2 specific attributes: objectivity and pattern recognition.
Break those down for us.
Objectivity means they completely lack skin in your particular game. They do not care if your feelings get slightly hurt. Their only allegiance is to the cold, hard truth of the situation. Pattern recognition means they have already seen this exact specific movie play out before in their own career.
Right. Do not ask a billionaire media mogul for operational advice on how to run a small regional plumbing business. They simply do not know the patterns of that industry. You need to find someone who has successfully solved your exact specific problem at least 3 times already.
And then there's the concept of the board of advisors, whether that is a formal corporate board of directors with voting power or just an informal group of trusted advisors you assemble. Dodson introduces the one-quarter rule for running these board meetings.
This is an absolute meeting lifesaver. Most corporate board meetings consist of 90% backward-limping updates. The CEO stands up and reads through 50 slides detailing exactly what happened last month. All the board members nod politely. It is incredibly boring, and it is a complete waste of highly expensive brain power.
The one-quarter rule completely flips that dynamic. It dictates that you spend a maximum of 25% of the meeting time reviewing the past, the updates. You spend the remaining 75% aggressively debating the future, the massive problems, and the big upcoming opportunities.
To do that, you have to send out all the historical updates as a read-ahead deck days before the meeting. And if the board members do not bother to read it, that is entirely on them. You absolutely do not waste valuable collective meeting time reading basic facts out loud to adults. You use that rare, concentrated time to actively solve complex problems.
Let us move into part 4, setting and adhering to priorities. This entire section is fundamentally about ruthless focus, and it naturally brings us to the holy
The 10-minute turn. Meaning, how incredibly fast can we get a plane on the ground, empty to passengers, refueled, cleaned, filled back up, and back up in the sky?
Exactly. And the true power of this was not just the mathematical number itself. The power was that absolutely everyone in the company intuitively understood it.
The pilot knew the goal. The baggage handler knew the goal. The cabin cleaner knew the goal.
Yes. If the cleaning crew was running slightly behind schedule, the pilot would literally stand up, walk to the back of the plane, and help them pick up trash. Because the 10-minute turn was the singular unifying mission of the entire organization. A truly great KPI acts as a universal common language that destroys departmental silos.
He also makes a really vital technical distinction between lagging indicators and predictive indicators. He uses a simple donut store example to explain this.
This concept is absolutely crucial for managers to grasp. Customer satisfaction is a classic lagging indicator. By the time you actually measure it with a survey, the customer has already eaten the donut, they have left the store, and they are driving home. You cannot go back in time and change their experience. You are entirely looking in the rearview mirror.
So what is the alternative?
A predictive indicator. For that same donut store, a predictive indicator might be measuring the average time in line or the number of fresh donuts currently in the display case. If you know the line is moving fast and you know the donuts are piping hot, you can scientifically predict that customer satisfaction will be extremely high.
So as a manager, you do not manage the lagging result. You aggressively manage the predictive metrics that actually cause the result.
Next, Dodson talks about the operating plan. And the famous story of Warren Buffett's personal airplane pilot establishes a genuinely harsh rule for setting daily priorities.
Right. Mike Flint was his pilot. The story goes that Flint asked Buffett for some long-term career advice. Buffett told him to write down a master list of his top 25 professional goals. So Flint spent some time and wrote them all out. Then Buffett said, okay, now circle your absolute top 5 goals. Flint thought about it, and he circled the top 5.
Then Flint enthusiastically said, great, I have my strategy. I will focus all my primary energy on the top 5 goals, and I'll just casually work on the other 20 goals in my spare time on the weekends.
And Buffett immediately stopped him and said, no, you completely misunderstand. Those other 20 goals just became your avoid at all costs list.
The profound point Buffett was making is that the things ranked number 6 through 25 on your list are actually the most dangerous enemies of your top 5 goals. They are just interesting enough to constantly distract your attention, but they are not actually important enough to change your life or your business. You have to ruthlessly, actively cut them out. True focus fundamentally requires painful sacrifice.
It is so incredibly hard to actually execute that. As human beings, we naturally want to do it all. We hate closing doors. But speaking of human motivation, let us talk about money. The section on alignment through compensation. Dodson argues pretty forcefully that simply throwing more money at people does not actually motivate your best employees to work harder.
That is correct. Your absolute top performers are already intrinsically motivated. They possess a deep internal drive to succeed. If you suddenly pay them 20% more, they are not going to magically figure out how to work 20% harder. They are already giving you maximum effort.
So, what is the actual point of variable compensation then?
Compensation is strictly a tool for alignment. It clearly dictates to them exactly what specific priorities they should be focusing their immense energy on.
For example, he says giving a generic annual bonus based on overall company performance is basically useless. It is way too vague, and the reward is too chronologically distant from the actual daily effort.
Dodson is a massive advocate for moving to quarterly bonuses instead.
Yeah.
It forcefully resets the psychological clock every 90 days. If an employee has a terrible first quarter, they are not completely demoralized for the remaining 9 months of the year. They can start fresh and completely crush quarter two. It keeps the behavioral feedback loop tight and highly relevant.
And then he shares this amazing little psychological trick he used called the sudden bonus.
Oh, this is honestly my favorite tactical advice in the entire book. Dodson used to keep a literal stack of $50 and $100 bills hidden in his desk drawer.
Just a stack of raw cash.
Just cash. And if he was walking the floor and saw an employee do something truly exceptional, like brilliantly handling a screaming customer or staying late to help a struggling teammate, he would immediately walk over to them and hand them a crisp $100 bill right on the spot.
It is obviously not about the raw financial value of the $100.
Not at all. It is about planting a massive psychological marker in their brain. It instantly communicates, I personally saw what you just did. That specific behavior is highly valuable to this company. Here is the undeniable physical proof of my appreciation. It reinforces the desired culture instantly and powerfully. It is infinitely more effective than sending a generic good job email 3 days later.
Let us move into the final core section, Part 5, an obsession with quality. The prevailing myth in most corporate boardrooms is that high quality is inherently expensive. They say, well, we simply cannot afford to be perfect.
And Dodson aggressively argues that that mindset is complete financial nonsense. True quality actually drives ultimate profitability. It fundamentally reduces your long-term costs.
Because if you ship a defective product out the door, you have to pay a customer service rep to handle the angry phone call. You have to pay return shipping. You have to manufacture a replacement. You have to pay to ship the replacement. And you probably permanently lost that customer's future business.
Exactly. That cycle is mind-bogglingly expensive. Doing the job right the very first time is actually free. Dodson also warns managers against falling for the Lake Wobegon effect. That is the psychological bias where absolutely everyone believes they are naturally above average. Most managers sit in their offices and assume the quality of their product is fantastic. But if you ask their actual paying customers, they will vehemently disagree.
So how do you actually uncover the ground truth about your quality? Dodson says you absolutely cannot rely on standard customer surveys.
Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Generic surveys like SurveyMonkey are just a lazy management crutch.
So you need what he calls verbatim. You need to physically see and hear the actual work being done.
The story of Tom Feeney, the CEO of Safelite Auto Glass, perfectly illustrates this. Feeney did not just sit in his corner office reading polished quarterly reports. He actively drove out and visited the local repair shops. He sat in the call centers and listened to the raw, unedited audio tapes of customer complaints.
Dodson calls this specific practice walking behind the tractor. You literally have to get your boots muddy and observe the actual work being executed on the front lines to truly see where the friction points are. You simply cannot manage complex quality issues from an ivory tower.
And when things inevitably do go wrong, because human error is unavoidable, he introduces this fascinating concept called the service recovery paradox.
This is such a counterintuitive psychological phenomenon. The data shows that a customer who experiences a severe problem but has that problem perfectly and swiftly resolved by the company is actually often more fiercely loyal than the customer who never experienced any problem at all.
It is wild, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The dramatic recovery essentially proves to the customer that you genuinely care about them when things get difficult.
Right.
It builds a deep emotional bond. It completely flips a massive negative into a massive net positive.
So strategically, Dodson says you should never punish honest mistakes. You must only aggressively punish the hiding of mistakes. You actively want your entire team to run aggressively toward the blazing fire, fix it quickly, and intentionally trigger that service recovery paradox.
He even implemented a literal get-out-of-jail-free card concept in his company. If you made a massive mistake, but you instantly self-reported it using their sensitive account alert system, you were entirely safe from any disciplinary action. Because by reporting it, you allowed the team to swarm the problem and fix it. If you tried to sweep it under the rug and hide it, that is when you were in serious trouble.
We have really covered a massive amount of ground today. We went deep into hiring scorecards, time management, seeking advice, ruthless priorities, and an obsession with quality. But as we begin to wrap this up, we have to talk about how all of these seemingly disparate pieces fit together, because Dodson actually had a conversation about this exact issue with Michael Porter, the legendary business strategy guru from Harvard.
Yes. Dodson originally thought he had just written a really good comprehensive checklist for managers. He thought, here are 5 distinct things you should try to do better.
But Michael Porter read it and told them, no, you completely misunderstand what you have created here. This is not a checklist. This is a highly unified theory of operational execution.
You literally cannot maintain great KPIs, which is priorities, if you do not have the right people in the building, which is team. You cannot effectively manage that team if you are completely drowning in unread emails, which is time. And you will never improve your quality if you refuse to actively listen to negative feedback, which is advice.
They are completely interlocking gears in a machine. You cannot just casually pick the 2 or 3 skills you find most comfortable and ignore the rest. You have to embrace the entire interconnected system.
Which perfectly brings us to the final story of the book. And I think it is the absolute perfect closing thought. It is the story of Roy Halladay, the famous Major League Baseball pitcher.
Roy Halladay pitched a perfect game back in 2010, which is arguably one of the absolute rarest and most difficult feats in all of professional sports.
But the profound part is what happened right before the game started. His pitching coach did not walk up to him in the dugout and say, hey, Roy, go out there today and be absolutely perfect.
Because that is just way too much pressure. It is completely paralyzing to demand perfection.
Exactly. Instead, his coach looked at him and said, just go out there and try to be good today. If you go out there and consistently try to be good, you eventually have a chance to be great.
I genuinely love that framing. Being a great manager is not about trying to be a superhero every single day. It is not about possessing some rare, innate, magical genius.
Not at all. It is strictly about mastering those 5 boring, highly repetitive, mechanical good habits. It is taking the time to write the detailed hiring scorecard. It is having the discipline to stick to the meeting agenda. It is making the hard choices to prioritize the top 5 tasks. If you consistently execute those fundamentally good things day after brutal day, you will eventually build a truly great organization. Ultimate greatness is just extreme consistency over a long period of time.
So that leads us to our challenge for you, the listener, as you head back into your week. Do not try to completely overhaul your entire management personality tomorrow morning. That is a recipe for total burnout. Just pick one single sub-skill we talked about today.
Maybe it is compressing that weekly 60-minute status meeting down to 40 minutes.
Or maybe it is finally sitting down and writing a strict outcomes-based scorecard for that new role you were hiring for. Or maybe tomorrow morning you just finally eat the absolute biggest frog on your desk before you open your inbox.
Just pick one. Start right there. Commit to being consistently good at that one specific thing.
Because at the end of the day, execution is the ultimate differentiator. Brilliant ideas are incredibly cheap and everywhere. Relentless execution is quite literally everything. But here's one final provocative thought to chew on before we go. If management is truly just a set of learnable mechanical skills and not a rare personality trait, then what is your actual excuse for not being a great manager by this time next year?
That is a tough question to answer, but it is the right one to ask.
Thank you for diving so deep with us today. We will see you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye, everyone, and good luck out there.